Hi, welcome to Ben TV. My name is Eshwar Krishnasamy, and today's show is all about queer people of South Asia.
I think it forces us to ask the question, where do these laws even come from? And what other laws are being practiced and enforced and imposed upon the Indian people, the South Asian people that aren't even our laws originally. I think it forces us to have those conversations which the common narrative that I hear when I engage with other Indian men is that if we don't talk about a problem, it's not there. So I think, this whole decriminalization will help us open up and have those conversations and actually be able to communicate openly with the people that are trying to tell us not to speak.
There is a level of shame or not wanting to talk about these things because, for 300 years of colonial rule it has changed our mindset, and we do look up to the West in terms of LGBT rights, but we often forget that these were always part of our culture. Has always been part of our culture, but it was taken away. So there is that 300 years of amnesia, I probably would say, where we are not even proud of our queer history and culture, and that's created a little bit of a gap. I think a lot of people are starting to be a lot more aware about this now. This conversation is definitely taking place in South Asian countries, and hopefully with the decriminalization of homosexuality in India, the neighboring countries would follow suit as well, and that would pave way for more rights, more power to the LGBT community of South Asia. So in terms of looking at our own culture and tradition, sometimes, and I'm sure we can all probably agree on that we often look at our own culture from a Western perspective, because we've all had Western education. We think in English, therefore when we look back at our own culture, sometimes we're not aware that we're seeing it from a Western context. We're not seeing it for what it is. Do you agree? Do you sometimes agree with that? Especially when it comes to queer history and culture? Because often a lot of these stories and depictions and mythology and blah, 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 they can often come across as quite, wow, bizarre. I don't quite get it. But do you believe that it's because we can't see it for what it is, because there has been a 300-year gap and we've been taught a completely different language and culture that we have somehow attached some kind of a shame?
I'm more of the view that, our backgrounds are quite different. We grew up in different countries outside South Asia, and, for me it's been a bit later in life that I've tapped into my Indian heritage more than maybe someone who has lived in a tighter Indian community within Australia. So more of the view that if we just keep talking, if we have awareness, it's not about, finger pointing and just kind of accepting history and, just communicating what the history was, and finding a way to move on, and also just to raise LGBT issues and raise issues in other countries as well, and just have an awareness of that. I think that's the core of where I stand on it.
I think in having this conversation, my intentions aren't to demonize the West or any of the ideologies. I think there's good and bad in every single. There are negatives of being from the East, and I think it's good that we have these conversations. Is my point,
Because some things that were lost were meaningful.
And it's not just that. Like I think sometimes we also come from a culture where if someone is just a little bit different than us, we see them as less than us, and it's almost dehumanizing on some level. So I think it's important to sort of stop and actually see where we are, coming from a lens of privilege and understanding, or maybe misunderstanding. Where it forces us to question if what we believe is actually correct or not, and if we are actually doing harm in the way we think and the way we act as a consequence of our wrong thoughts. You know what I mean? So I think giving people a chance to speak for themselves and also listening to them and what they have to say, rather than saying you don't get to speak because you are queer or you are gay, or you are a woman who wants to be a man, or a man who identifies as a woman. It's just, I think the important thing is that we have those conversations and we listen to each other and consider that maybe what each and every one of us says has validity to it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the South Asian culture in general as well, as what we can see prior to colonial rule, did have that platform, or did come from a society where a lot of things were fluid. So in some ways, I suppose it is good to talk about what happened, or how things were back then, so that some things that we had were good. And for younger queer people now to be able to use their own culture to affirm their queerness, I think that's a great thing.
I guess what all of us have spent many years now living in Australia, and Australia has obviously, as a former colony of Britain as well, has had its own issues around recognising LGBT people, a strong Catholic and Church of England influence, has influenced political parties, has influenced many of the laws that we have, and we have quite prominent churches in this country that do control, have an impact in education and social services, and so I think India and a lot of the surrounding countries that were colonies of Britain, there's a lot in common that we have, that those countries have in common with Australia. So it's all just kind of recognising the past and supporting LGBT rights into the future.
Absolutely.
And when you talk about impact, I also think it's important to look at the individual that's before you, or that is you, and recognize that you yourself have agency. And if you are that brown, gay, queer, lesbian, trans person, that you going out there and having these conversations and pushing those right buttons and getting people to question their own ideologies as well.
Absolutely.
That in itself is you doing the work.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So yeah.
And especially within the South Asian queer community here in Australia as well, people definitely do face a lot of homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. And they often don't have a platform or a space to connect with other South Asian queer people as well. So there is definitely a sense of not quite belonging here and then not quite belonging there, because there's so many intersections there as well, just as much as how we are. You're Anglo-Indian, first generation Australian, Singaporean Indian, of Tamil descent, and you migrated to Australia in 2006, and I'm sixth generation Malaysian Indian, and I moved here 9 years ago. So our stories are all quite diverse, but somehow the identity of where we come from, which is South Asia, is the one that unites us at the end of the day. Because there's definitely a link between culture, history, and family, because family means a lot to us as well, and hence why having these conversations about history and culture to our family is sometimes the only way to stamp our mark that, hey, we're here, we exist. So thank you, Aashvin and Gareth, for being part of this discussion. I think we've had a pretty interesting discussion today. I hope that after today's discussion that you've got a little bit more of a better understanding about the culture and the history of queer people of South Asia. Hope to see you next time. Thank you.